Okay. Hello, everybody. Leo here. Sorry to keep you waiting. I am struggled with the getting started with the live technology here, but I appreciate you all being here today. So let's see. Oh, we actually have people here in the live, so that's good. I'd love to hear where you are. I am in Northern California, and today is actually a sunny day. It is beautiful, and I'm glad to be here with all of you. So, where in the world are you? I'd love to hear from you. So, just shout it out in the chat. And thanks for the patience and the grace today. Okay, so the webinar that we are doing today is called Moving from Resistance to Flow and the Power of a Single Focus. So that's our topic, and we're going to get into that in a minute. London, hi Tashi, good to see you. I see Misha put into the chat earlier, Misha from Israel. And like I said, I'm in California, originally from the island of Guam. So just to let you all know, you don't often meet people from Guam, I think. So that's kind of cool. Pennsylvania from Jill. Okay, cool. Okay, so in this webinar, first of all, some basic things that I encourage is to set aside everything else that you were planning to do. So if you're like, going to do a bunch of emails or be browsing the web while watching the webinar, my encouragement is to not do that, to just practice full focus and being fully here. And so give your attention to something. And actually that is part of the topic of this webinar is full focus and what happens. And so you get to practice it and see what gets in the way. So that's the first thing. Petaluma, California. Oh my God, Petaluma is gorgeous. Spent a little bit of time there in November, and it was gorgeous. Went to some wineries and breweries nearby and hikes. Cool. Anyway, lucky to be living in Petaluma. So practice full focus. And the second thing I'm going to ask you to do is to try and find a question about the topic of the webinar that is relevant to what you're facing in your life. And so this way we don't just listen to and just kind of absorb the information, but we're actually actively engaging with the content and trying to apply it to our lives, asking questions, seeing where we get tripped up, and then asking the question and allowing me to answer it. And so you're engaging with the material a lot more. And I find that that's a much more effective way to actually use something than just to listen, just to watch, just to read. Those are good modalities as well, but they don't actually have us integrating something. And so it's a really good practice is to listen to the content, but also try and find where you get tripped up, what your questions are, what your holes in your understanding are, or where you're like, that doesn't quite make sense, and challenge me a little bit. Dublin, Ireland. Hi, Antoine. Good to see you. I haven't, we talked before, and it's good to see you on here. Sheila is in the Netherlands, Eindhoven. Hi. Hi, Sheila. Welcome. So we have some people from over there in Europe, some people here in the US. Wherever you are in the world, you are welcome. I'm glad to have you here. Okay, so let's talk about moving from resistance to flow and talk about what we mean by that, and then talk about the power of a single focus. So this is really addressing when we feel stuck sometimes in our lives. And this is going to happen from time to time. We feel unable to move forward. Let's see if I get this mic right. Unable to move forward in our lives. And we find ourselves procrastinating more or feeling stuck in indecision, unsure of what our next steps are. And we're just full of what I call resistance. Resistance is inner resistance. There might be outward resistance, but the inner resistance is, I don't really have the energy, the like ability to focus on something, and we kind of avoid, we procrastinate. So those are some common words that are similar to resistance. So we're going to look at like what the hell is going on there. If you're in that place, like why am I resisting my meaningful work, all the things that I want to be doing to move my life forward? Why am I resisting it? A lot of times we think we shouldn't have the resistance. And what I'm proposing here in this webinar is that it actually doesn't have to be a roadblock. It can be a place of learning and something to actually work with so that we can not only get better at working with resistance, but create the very conditions for a greater sense of ease, clarity, and flow. So that's what we're going to be talking about here in this webinar. Netanya. Okay, I'm not familiar with that, but thank you. Good to see you here, Misha. I'm so glad you're joining as well. I love seeing old friends here in the chat and here in this live, but also new people as well. So some of you I recognize, actually most of you, but others I'm new to, and so just feel free to say a little bit about why you're here in the chat. And again, you can post the questions here in the chat. I will be kind of switching between like trying to give my talk, but also seeing what you're posting in the chat as well. Try and engage with the chat, more than is my default tendency. Okay, so we're gonna look at this resistance and how we can use it to learn to get into flow. We want to learn to understand what that inner resistance is all about. Why are we avoiding and procrastinating? Why are we feeling that resistance? Why are we stuck? And then how to actually cultivate some awareness, which is really key to all of this. We're going to talk about embracing change and uncertainty. And then talk about some simple strategies to shift from resistance to flow. And then we're going to talk about creating an environment that supports change. So that's a basic outline. We'll see if I'll try and cover all of that, but also covering your questions. And I wanted to talk about the last part of the title of this webinar, the power of a single focus. So there's a lot of really key skills, capacities, tools, whatever you might want to call it, but a single focus is going to be one of the key ones that we're going to talk about here. And I think it's really powerful, simple, maybe obvious to a lot of us. We've heard things about single focus, but I'd like to talk about how it actually meets this inner resistance and helps us to move to flow. So I think sometimes it really helps to understand how all of that works. Okay, all sound good. If there's anything that I'm saying that's not quite, making sense to you, please post into the chat. I'll be checking the chat periodically. Okay, let's talk about why we get stuck. Trying to understand some procrastination, understand procrastination a bit and patterns of resistance. Now, this in and of itself can be an entire webinar that we can spend an entire day on. We can do a whole course on the whys, but I don't want to get stuck in the why too much. I'm going to try and just give us a brief understanding of the whys, and that'll help give us some like a foundation to build on. So, and if you were in my YouTube live last week, 1 week ago today, I talked a little bit about this. And so we talked about overwhelm in that one, but in this one, we're talking about procrastination and resistance. And really, there's a similar mechanism going on. So this will be a review for those of you who were there last week. And I recognize a few of you in the chat already from last week. And so why why do we have inner resistance? Why do we have procrastination? Why do we get stuck? I'm actually going to use an example from my life recently because I think that it's instructive. So I was doing great. I was, like really on top of my work and my meaningful projects and fitness and health. Eating was going great. I was learning something outside of work. And so I felt really good about how things were going. And then my whole family got the flu. So they were all sick at the same time, except for me. And I'm taking care of them and kind of put everything else aside. And it was like taking care of multiple people, cooking for them, meeting their needs. One thing I felt great about though is that I wasn't getting sick. Um, Natanya's in Israel. Thank you, Misha. I wasn't getting sick, and I was like, man, every time my family gets sick, I don't get sick. For, I don't know, the last 5-10 years, I haven't really gotten sick. I got COVID once in 2023, but it took a few years for me to get any COVID, and I also just haven't gotten the cold or flu for the longest time. So I was taking care of them. I wasn't isolating myself from them, and I didn't get sick. And I was like, man, I am immune. My immune system is so good. I felt so good about it. So that's kind of funny because then 2 weeks later, I got the flu. And I, you know, I got sick and I was a little bit humbled by that. Because I was like, oh, I thought I had such an incredible immune system. But what happened was I was sick for maybe 4 days. Nothing too intense. It was, your usual like fever and not feeling, low energy, sinuses, that kind of stuff. But, I handled it, I think, fairly well with acceptance. And then after those 4 days, I'm like, okay, my symptoms are gone. I'm going to get back into my exercise program. I'm going to be eating healthy like I was, 4 days ago. I'm going to be get back into my work. And none of that happened. I couldn't exercise. I couldn't get myself to exercise. I was just stuck. I didn't have any internal, like external problems. My body was fine. I was, no symptoms. I didn't have a fever or anything. So I'm like, I could actually go out and exercise, but I just couldn't motivate myself to do it. I also couldn't motivate myself to get back into my healthy eating patterns. The healthy food that I wanted wasn't appealing to me, and I just wanted to eat junk. Not that bad, like stuff I hadn't been eating for a while. So just like 4 bowls of cereal a day. I love cereal, but all kinds of, cookies and stuff like that. So eating, I really had a hard time motivating myself to get back into the healthy eating. And then work, which had piled up a bit, I was really resisting that as well. And I had a hard time getting back into it. So I recognized that, and it took me a few days to recognize, like, man, I am really feeling some resistance here. So part of the resistance was that my energy was lower. I didn't have any symptoms anymore, but just my energy wasn't back to where it was. I wasn't 100% yet. I didn't recognize that the first couple of days. I'm like, I'm not sick. I should be able to work out, right? But I couldn't. And so in retrospect, I look back on it, I'm like, man, I think I'm lower energy. So my energy, my capacities were lower. And this, can happen from sickness, but it can happen just from lack of sleep. Maybe you have a newborn in the house and you're not sleeping well. Maybe you're traveling. Maybe you've got, a lot going on, and that your energy is just drained. So that's one thing to notice is, how is my energy? It was low after I got sick, after I got better. The second thing is that the difficulty of the stuff that I was facing was harder than normal. When you are churning along, taking on individual tasks, exercise, workouts, that kind of stuff is easy because you're in a rhythm, you're in a routine, and you've been doing it over and over and over again. And so it's just like, oh yeah, I just do that again, right? I was in a real good groove before I got sick. But after I got sick, I had stopped doing all of that stuff, and it I wasn't in a groove, and in fact I was in a different groove, and I had to move back into that old groove, and the things at work had piled up, and my, all the things that I want to do in my personal life had piled up, understandably, because I took a rest. But they were higher. So my energy was lower, but the things that I had to do were harder and bigger, right, than I had been before I got sick. And so those two things changed. I, they were reversed before. I had a lot of energy before I got sick, and the things were really easy. But they changed. And this happens in our lives all the time. We go through sickness, travel, some kind of crisis in our life, and it drains our energy. Maybe we're not sleeping well, maybe we're feeling a lot of anxiety, and the difficulty of something goes up in proportion sometimes. Sometimes they're independent of each other, but sometimes they're actually related. Maybe I'm feeling more fear about my work because my finances are struggling, and so that makes me think, if I don't do well at work, I'm gonna lose my job and my finances are gonna get worse. And so the finances, which are draining my energy right now, also make my fear at work go up, which makes the difficulty of the work go up. The amount of work might start to pile up, which makes the difficulty even more. And so now we have lower and lower energy and higher um, difficulty, intensity, overwhelm, and fear. Those kinds of things all make this part harder. So that happens from time to time. So how do we typically deal with that? Well, we have some patterns when we have resistance. So avoidance is the biggest one. Distraction would be a form of avoidance. Comfort foods, like eating chips or cookies, that's comforting ourselves. And there's nothing wrong with comforting ourselves, but we get stuck in a cycle of I'm comforting myself and I feel bad about myself, comfort, feel bad. And it's not just food that comforts us. We might smoke, we might do drugs, we might drink alcohol, we might watch YouTube videos, and those things are comforting, but they get us stuck in a cycle of that. So that's a pattern of resistance to notice. Now, there isn't anything wrong with having resistance, having fear, being stuck, comforting ourselves. Comfort foods are not bad things. I'm not trying to villainize any of this stuff. I'm trying to say, let's just notice what we tend to do when we have this kind of shift in resistance. Another one is we get stuck. So stuckness is just like, I'm really having a hard time moving forward because of the resistance and my lower energy, my higher degree of overwhelm and fear. And I'm really unclear on how to actually take the steps needed. And I'm also feeling a lack of trust in myself to be able to do that. And I also don't really want to address it, right? If you ever had a problem that feels insurmountable, we start to get a sense of hopelessness. When we have a sense of hopelessness, we're not empowered to actually tackle this seemingly insurmountable problem. Doesn't matter if the problem is actually insurmountable. How would we actually know unless we tried, right? But we feel like it is, and so that gives us a sense of hopelessness. If I'm not making the progress that I would like, and so then I get stopped. How's this resonating with everybody? This is making sense? Please put it in the chat so I'm not just talking to myself. I want to make sure all of this is making sense. So this is kind of the whys and some of the patterns of resistance. Now we have lots of patterns of resistance. That could be a whole webinar in and of itself as well. So you might call out your own patterns. Maybe it's not something that I've mentioned. Maybe you do get stuck in a YouTube loop or eating comfort foods. But a lot of times we just don't tackle the problem because it feels hopeless. What are some other patterns of resistance? Resistance can often kick in our control mechanisms into overdrive. And so control mechanisms, avoidance is a control mechanism. Comfort foods are a control mechanism. Another is Israeli. Cool. Peta tikwa. Cool. I am seeing names that I've never heard of, and I love it. I'm learning some new stuff. I need to go to Israel. So anyway, sorry for getting distracted there. So distractions are another one. So we can distract ourselves. So maybe I distract myself with busy work, with emails and messages, unimportant stuff. Um, Maybe I distract myself with social media or the news. Um, and so those are some patterns of resistance, but other control mechanisms would be things like perfectionism, right? So I need to get everything just right so that I, can control things so that I don't expose myself to whatever I'm afraid of. Antoine says, I recognize it all. Yeah, thank you. Thanks for owning that. Um, Deanna says, for me, it's all types of avoidance, especially procrastination. Yeah, absolutely. Another control mechanism is blame and anger. So we're going to be pointing our fingers. It's their fault, it's their fault, it's their fault. Or blaming myself, just like beating yourself up with a stick. Uh, really fun exercise. Anger, I'm just so mad at the world. If you ever have been someone who's just been frustrated all day long, there's nothing wrong with any of these things, but if you notice yourself, anger is a control mechanism. Might not feel like it because it feels like you're out of control, but it gives us something to do that we know how to do, right? It feels safe. Safety is another one. Hiding, it might sound like avoidance, but hiding is another one where it's just like, maybe if no one notices me, right? Not being accountable. Feeling tired. Victimization, why me? And again, feeling like a victim is not the same thing as like victim blaming and shaming. So we're not talking about that at all. We're talking about like, it's like, why me? Like the world is happening to me. So Antoine asks, what about feeling tired? So that's a really good question. So feeling tired is both a physical thing, right? So I'm just tired. I need to rest. It's a simple, like physical symptom. Not that simple, but I'm tired. I need to rest, right? But it can be, I think, as Antoine is pointing to, it can be actually a way to, I want to say, avoid or get some kind of control. And so you might get into a pattern of, I'm too tired, I don't have the energy, and then you don't actually move forward. And so it's really hard to, tiredness is hard to distinguish because it is actually a physical symptom that we would want to address. So you would want to actually get rest if you're tired. But then we can find ways to just avoid everything. And so, and now we might not actually fix the problem of being tired because we're not actually resting. We're just, making ourselves more tired in different ways. Heather says, this is really resonating. I'm glad. As soon as I start resisting a task, it gets worse. And then I never want, yeah, right? Like it kind of just piles on all of this. Our judgment of ourselves, it feels more and more difficult, even though the task itself hasn't changed. It feels more difficult with each growing day that we avoid it. It's really good to notice that. Diana says, it's hard for me to differentiate from when I'm feeling tired and when I'm just avoiding things. Yes, a lot makes sense, alas. That last word, alas, is so beautiful. Okay, so it sounds like this is resonating and we're all really getting this. If anyone doesn't, it's not making sense, please put that in the chat. Okay, so it's hard to differentiate. Let's address that really quickly. So hard to differentiate from when I'm feeling tired and when I'm just avoiding things. Well, what I would say is at first, just assume that you're just tired. And you might want to take responsibility for that and say, okay, if I'm tired, it might be better for me to get some rest right now. And so we want to do that. But if what you're noticing is day after day, you're just tired, and you're resting and you're avoiding, you're not actually moving forward on anything. And that might be 2, 3, 4 days. It might be weeks. At some point, you'll notice, like, I'm actually using I'm too tired as a rationalization. Rationalization is actually another really common pattern of resistance. And there's some truth to rationalization. So this is why it works. I've mentioned this before, but when I was trying to quit smoking cigarettes, um, I I found I noticed the rationalization that just one puff doesn't hurt. Just taking one puff of a cigarette doesn't hurt. And that is literally true. Like, you're not going to die from one puff of a cigarette. You're not going to get cancer from one puff. Now, you could get cancer from doing that repeatedly. That one puff might contribute to cancer, but that one puff won't actually kill you. But so there's some truth to the rationalization, which made it more powerful, right? My brain could believe it, like, oh yeah, it's actually true. I had to see that over the long term, it wasn't true. That one puff was leading to me having a second one and a third, and there was a snowball effect. It made it easier and easier for me just to go down that slippery slope, of of just smoking multiple times a day. Jill, hi Jill. Sometimes I struggle with deciding if I should make changes to a situation or make changes to my attitude towards a situation. So that leaves me stuck sometimes. Yeah, I would say, again, this is another one where there isn't a right answer here. I would say try making changes to the situation if that feels doable, right? So if it feels doable to make a change to the external situation, if I just change this, then that'll address the problem and I'll start to move forward. But if there's a couple of caveats to that. One is, if that feels too impossible, like maybe changing the external situation is actually out of your control. Maybe your boss, your work won't let you change the external situation. Maybe you're in a romantic relationship with someone and you don't control them. So changing the external situation isn't always possible. So in that case, you might start to take a look at the internal one, because that is under your control. The second thing is, if you are constantly changing the external situation as your go-to, as your default, but that doesn't actually fix the problem for you. You're not actually moving forward in the way you want. And so what happens is, we're like, if I rearrange the circumstances of my life, then I can move forward. And you start rearranging the circumstances of your life, but that is an endless task. You can't ever rearrange the external circumstances to the point where you're done, and to the point where it is perfectly set up so that you don't have to ever feel resistance. That doesn't work, right? It's like a whack-a-mole kind of game. There's no end to it. And so at some point, let yourself indulge in the rearranging the external circumstances of your life, because sometimes that actually does help. But don't let yourself indulge with that forever. And maybe give yourself, let myself do the external stuff for a week. And if that hasn't actually made the changes that I want to happen, then I'm going to start to address the internal things. Okay. I see a couple more comments here, but I want to move on with my outline here. So we start to understand what's going on with procrastination and patterns of resistance. So we're aware of it now that we've had a conversation with it, and you're all calling out what it is for you. Please feel free to put into the chat if I've missed your pattern, or if there's one that I've mentioned and you're like, yeah, that's mine. So calling it out here in the chat is actually a really good practice. It's almost like journaling, where you see it, you see the pattern, but then writing it down reinforces the awareness. Putting into the chat does the same thing, but it has you taking ownership of it to a group of people. Even though these are strangers, you're doing it with me, and I'm not a stranger. So taking ownership of your pattern by writing it down and sharing it with others is a really powerful way to start to build awareness. And so building awareness is the key to this. That's not going to come as a surprise to a lot of you who are Zen Habits readers or viewers, but if we aren't aware of our internal resistance pattern, we won't be able to do anything about it. It just controls our life. Um, so, for example, if someone, Deanna mentioned victimhood, right? If someone is constantly in victimhood, what that means is they're like pointing the finger, like, oh, my life is so hard, and people are such jerks, and I can never catch a break, and why is this always happening to me? And why me, right? And so, you know, just me saying it might trigger some people right now, but um, when you are caught in that, usually you don't have awareness, because one of the features of victimhood is a lack of responsibility. So, victimhood is an unwillingness to take responsibility, right? And so when we are caught in victimhood, we usually won't even see it, because part of the pattern of victimhood is that we can't take responsibility. And if we can't take responsibility, we can't even say, yeah, I'm doing that thing. I am doing victimhood. But once you say, I am playing the victim all the time, you have now taken some responsibility just by calling it out, just by bringing some awareness to it. And all of a sudden, it's like shining a light on it. And you're like, over there, I am playing a victim there. And over there with my spouse. And over there with my parents. Over there with my coworkers and my friends. I'm constantly complaining about my life. Interesting, interesting, interesting. Okay, once you've done that, it's like, oh, you know, you've been taking the pill in the matrix, and you can be like, oh my god, I can see everything. Right now, seeing everything doesn't change it. I mean, it does, but it isn't sufficient to change it all. It is a necessary but insufficient condition. So we have awareness. It's required in order to make the changes that we're talking about here, but it isn't enough in and of itself. Does that make sense to everybody? I saw Jyoti's question about AI, and I'm going to come back to that. That's a good one, but it isn't directly related to what I'm talking about, so we'll come back to that by the end of this call, hopefully. Okay, so increasing awareness is required. So how do we do it? The problem is that these patterns are subconscious, right? Unconscious. We have drilled them into ourselves for years, and usually at an early age, when we didn't have the awareness that we were doing that. We were doing it to keep ourselves safe. And so, we can go into the reasons that keeps us safe. If it doesn't feel like, procrastination keeps me safe, it makes my life worse, right? Avoidance makes my life worse. But hopefully you can see in that example, it does. And all of these control mechanisms, patterns of resistance, are ways to keep ourselves safe. And so we reached for any way we could figure out to make ourselves safe years ago. And then it did work to some extent, at least a certain percentage of the time, enough to reinforce it. And then we just did it over and over again until it became something we didn't even realize. It was just the water we were swimming in. And once it becomes the water we're swimming in, we are actually a victim to it. We can't do anything about it until we are brought some awareness. And that's why a webinar like this actually really helps, because we're talking about it here. Reading books about it and seeing yourself in the books helps. This is why I asked you to try and come up with a question that addresses your particular problem. And I'd love for you to put into the chat if you do, because it causes you to reflect on your life. Where is this true in my life? Not like, oh, I don't have it, it's not true for me, but more like, where is it true for me? And that has you bringing awareness to something you wouldn't have gotten awareness anyway, otherwise. A therapist and a coach are two other modalities that I think really help with this. So you need to be able to see it for yourself. If you can't see it for yourself, you can't do anything about it. So get a therapist or a coach, or ask, a really honest friend, like, what do you see in this area? Why am I, does the world keep beating up on me? And your friend, if they have done any of this kind of work, might just reflect to you like, you know, you might be playing the victim a lot. You might be getting caught up in complaint. Okay, so let's talk about some techniques to further increase awareness. So what we want to do is write down the pattern. I am avoiding by doing this. I am avoiding by doing this. And what we want to do is, instead of thinking of it as some kind of fault of ours, think of it as this pattern that we want to like bring more awareness of. And so every time we see it, we want to be like, yes, reinforce it with like, yes, I found it. So it's like a, you know, seeing a where's Waldo, right? Like I found Waldo. We want to be able to see that until all of a sudden, like we can't avoid seeing it. So we want to write it down and then start to try and catch it during the day. If you can catch it 5 times a day, that's a good amount. If you're not catching it every day, like even once a day, what I encourage you to do then is to have focused practice sessions. So 1 hour every day, I'm going to do the thing that I'm avoiding. And then watch what happens during that hour. Like, oh, 10 o'clock is here. I can do that. I can start it in a few minutes or later today. I'll do it in the afternoon. It's totally okay. Like, oh, I tell myself it's totally okay. And then you might ask, like, why is that? Start to dig into what's going on. What do you notice about why you put off this thing the last 4 days in a row? Okay. So focused sessions so that we can see it more, or try and catch it 5 times a day. Once you do that, what we're going to be doing is creating a shift. So we're having resistance. How do we move to flow? So I'm going to give you a few strategies. Let me see if I'm missing anything here in the chat. Bob Proctor says, when we change the way we look at things, the thing which we look at changes. In simple words, perception. Absolutely. Okay, so following Mr. Proctor's advice, let's change the way we look at resistance, avoidance, procrastination, and all of our other control mechanisms. So when we start to set them up as the obstacle or the villain or the problem, as something bad, as something wrong, what we're really doing is judging a part of ourselves. And that becomes in and of itself an obstacle. When we're like, I suck for procrastinating. Procrastinating is such a judgmental word, right? And it's like, well, I suck for having fear. Might be another way to put it. And instead, we might just see like, oh, I'm human for having fear. I'm human for having resistance. But I think fear might be a better word for it. So fear is actually what's going on underneath the procrastination, underneath the avoidance and comforting ourselves. We're feeling some fear. And so we might just say to ourselves, I'm feeling fear. I'm feeling fear, and that's so human. And what we're doing then is starting to learn to become more compassionate with ourselves and seeing the resistance as just a manifestation of fear. And a fear is a part of being human, part of life. If you think you can go through life with no fear, good luck. I've never seen it happen. Maybe someone who's got like a certain piece of their brain disconnected from the rest of it. Like, I have no fear. That person will probably die. We need fear to keep us safe, but the problem is that fear goes into hyperdrive. What happens, incidentally, the reason why fear goes into hyperdrive is that we have, what do you call that? Overactive pattern recognition. So, you know, if there was an actual like tiger in front of you, you should feel fear, because that fear is going to motivate you to do something about that. Maybe put up a defense, maybe get into safety, you know, whatever you need to do to be safe from that actual threat. But the problem is we have started to identify way more things as threats than are actually threats. So we, instead of correctly identifying threats, we have generalized like all of the other things. If someone looks at me the wrong way, that's a threat. Well, there's good reasons for that. We're social animals, but it's not an actual threat. We're not in any actual danger. We have, when we had a painful event when we were kids, we were like, that is painful. I need to make sure that never happens again. And when that happens, this, like someone disapproves of you or teases you about whatever, right? You're like, that's painful. I need to make sure that doesn't happen. And so you start scanning the room, every room you walk into, for the potential for that to happen. And of course, there's always a potential for that to happen. So we're always afraid. So we over identify the potential threats of the patterns, and it's not helpful, and they're not real threats. Okay, so what we want to do is just to understand that there's fear there. I have fear. I'm human. And the thing that I do is a protection mechanism to stop me from the thing I'm afraid of. And then what we want to do is to say, actually, there is nothing to be afraid here. I do not need the protection. If I fail at this thing, if someone judges me, like there's no actual threat there. I can deal with that. If I'm being judged, I can be compassionate. I can talk to the person. I can learn from their feedback, or I can just understand that this person is judging because of their own fear, and then start to have compassion for them and realize it has no bearing on my self-worth and who I am. So we want to start to realize that there's no actual threat. We have fear, but there's no actual threat, and there's no need for a defense. And once we do that, we can start to practice a new view that is not about protecting ourselves. So, I need to avoid this thing that I'm facing. What if instead I can be like, man, if I actually move through this, I can help many people. You can see that that's a different view. If I work through this pile of stuff, I can help many people. We're running a little low on time. I might go a few minutes over if you're all up for it, but I would love for you to put into the question if you have any chats. Into the chat if you have any questions. Okay, so we start to develop a new view that is sans protection, right? So it's just like, I don't need this protection. And it's a view of, I can fully trust myself. And what we need to do is practice that view over and over and again. And what I encourage is practice sessions of 20 minutes. 20-minute practice sessions once a day at first for a week. So 5 days. 5 days of 20-minute sessions. And in those 20-minute sessions, what I want you to do is write down your new view, the Bob Proctor advice, right? How am I going to view not only my resistance, but the fact that I actually don't need the protection from whatever I'm afraid of. So I have fear, and that means I'm human, but I don't need this protection. This is a place for me to express myself, express my creativity. Or maybe this is a place for me to play. It's a playground. So write down that new view and then practice it during these 20-minute sessions. And what I want you to do in a practical way in these 20-minute sessions is to choose really small things and knock them out while holding this new view. I don't need protection. I can trust myself. Or this is a playground, and then just play. Let yourself play. And I want you to embody this new view. Embody trust, or embody play, or embody an expression of your creativity, whatever it is that you're trying to do. Imagine that that is actually who you are, and practice it. And you're going to fail, but practice it. So 20 minutes a day, block it off on your calendar. And we want to do only 20 minutes because 30 to 60 minutes might be more beneficial in some ways, but we're going to have a lot of resistance. And in those, we want to tackle small things. And so it's like, let me just open this email. Let me just read the first sentence of an email that I'm resisting. Let me read the second sentence. And take a breath and do the next small step. Okay, in week 2, I'd like you to do 2 20-minute sessions separated by at least 10 minutes. So take a 10-minute break in between. And still embody the same thing. And now in week 2, you can do slightly bigger steps. So 2 sessions and a slightly bigger step. So we're doing 2 increases, the number of sessions and the slightly bigger steps. We don't want to do really hard things. Remember, our resistance is from our lowered energy and our high, difficulty level. So what we want to do is lower the difficulty level down to meet our energy. And eventually, through this practice, our energy starts to increase. We start to move forward with our life. Our life starts to flow more. And we get into flow. And this feels really good. And our energy actually increases as we start to move through things. We don't want to overwork ourselves, which is why we're only doing 20-minute sessions. But through this, our life starts to change. Now, if you feel really good and you want to do a bonus 20-minute session, go ahead and do it. If you want to do 3, go ahead and do it. But don't do more than that at first, until this becomes too easy. In week 3, if you've been doing 2 sessions, go ahead and do 3 sessions, but don't increase the difficulty of the things. By the 4th week, you will be out of resistance into flow for most people, if you're actually following this. The last thing I want to touch on, and again, put into the chat if you have any questions. The last thing I want to touch on is single focus. So in these 20-minute sessions, if you choose small things, I'm just going to open up this email. What I want you to do is to pretend that this one tiny thing, it takes a minute amount of energy. Just imagine that one entire thing is the only thing that exists in the universe. It's the only thing that you need to do today. Because what we tend to do is to say, oh, I need to do this, and then all of these other things. And so our minds are like taking in all the things that we need to do, even though we might not name them. We just know that there's so many. This is only one of many, and it feels like, Sisyphus pushing stuff up the hill that it's just like too hard for us, right? And so what we want to do is to think this tiny thing is the only thing in the world that I care about, and let it become your whole focus. And this is a practice as well. And so let yourself do that during these 20-minute sessions, is single focus. And as you do that, you're going to start to be able to just practice with this one thing. We tend to try and practice with a lot of things at once, and that's not good practice, not for the stage what we're talking about here. Eventually we want to mix in more things, but not in this stage. But whatever the stage you're in, having a single focus for each moment is really important. So let yourself practice single focus for a whole, for this one whole task. I'm going to open up this email, and then you let yourself that's all that matters in the world. And you do it, and celebrate that, like hallelujah, whatever your phrase would be. Thank Zorps, whatever it is. Appetite comes when you eat. There's a lot of wisdom in that. Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Mohan. Okay. I think that's all I'm going to share in terms of what I had to share. I'm going to start to answer questions here. How does it work with small kids? Awesome. Okay. So, Sarit, if you could put in to the chat what are you facing resistance with regarding small kids? It's a big question. Is small kids, it can be tough. Small kids, one thing is they can increase our overwhelm because we have a lot of extra stuff to do when we have small kids. They're so dependent on us, and there's so many tasks. It can also decrease our tiredness, increase our frustration, decrease our sleep. Overwhelmed. Yeah. But Sarit, what are you overwhelmed with? Is it the tasks with the small kids, or is it work stuff, but you've got small kids going on over here, and that makes the resistance to work stuff harder? I'll come back to that question if you post any more clarity. Let me go to Jyothi's question. You have discussed this topic while explaining discipline, that keeping actions simple until they become consistent action. So same thing here. Yeah, what we're talking about is retraining our minds, right? And so if we want to create a different mindset, a different way of viewing our resistance and the things we're resisting, we want to drill it. If we want to make the things that we're facing which are difficult, make them easier, and then single focus, we need to drill that. And to do that, we definitely want to simplify. That's why I have 20-minute sessions once a day for the first 5 days, and then the next week, twice a day. And these are training sessions. We're drilling it, and we want to drill it very, very simply, as you said, Jyoti. I will talk a little bit about small kids. I have a client who just has a newborn, like 2 weeks old, and man, they're not sleeping well. You know, their relationship with their spouse is strained because they're like both not sleeping well. Luckily, I think they're navigating it pretty well, but it brings me back to when I had small kids, when I had newborns, and there's just so much. You got to feed them, they're crying and you don't know why, there's diapers to change, there's, you know, so much to do, and then you've got your regular work to do on top of that. Jody says, I feel resistance to change things or to exercise. I feel something bad might happen if I do so eventually, end up not doing it. Yeah. I'll get to that in a sec. Let's talk about the small kids. What we want to recognize when we have small kids, and this is true even if you don't have small kids, but maybe you've got, you know, you're caring for a sick relative, like a parent or someone in your life. When we are taking on more than just like really simple, you know, straightforward stuff, we're taking on small kids, we're caring for people who are sick, we have someone who went to the hospital and we're visiting them in the hospital for multiple hours a day. Now, this kind of stuff, what we want to recognize is that this will drain us, it will lower our energy, and that will make everything else that was easy way harder. And so we've now again reversed the balance of things, right? And so we have to start to recognize that I have lower energy right now. How do I allow myself to, first of all, have a little bit of grace for myself? I'm not going to be able to do the stuff that I thought I should be doing. And whatever, you know, whatever I'm doing right now is all that I have energy to do. And then how do I actually lower the difficulty level of all of this stuff? How do I lower it? So I'm just going to take on small things. You know, if you have kids and they take a nap, you know, the first priority is take a nap yourself, right? Let yourself rest. The second priority is, if you have a little bit of energy, do some little things that help to free up your time and energy. Like if I can like prepare for dinner a little bit or clean up, it's going to make me feel so much better. If I take a shower, it'll make me feel so much better. What are the things that I can do that are going to make me feel better and more able to take on other things? So the little bit of the time that you have has a multiplier effect. Sarit says, I have 3 kids under the age of 6. Oh my God, brings me back. I've been there for sure. Some of you might know I have we have a blended family, but I have 6 kids altogether. They are now all adults. My youngest daughter is 18, going on 19 next month, and my oldest daughter is 31, going on 32 next month. And so we're past that stage, but we had multiple kids under the age of 6, and we were homeschooling them as well. So Sarit says, it's hard for me to finish small tasks. So I'm with him during the whole day. So I'm trying to do less things, small chunks, and trying to figure out if I can do things with them, even if it's really hard, like studying. So yeah, you're gonna have a hard time doing anything when you're homeschooling. You're with them all the time, and there's multiple 3 kids under the age of 6. That's challenging. So you have to just give yourself some grace. And then again, in whatever pockets of time you have, either rest or take on those little things. Um, but what I would say is what helped me was teamwork. So, I I was working while my wife was homeschooling, but um, I I knew that things would pile up for her, and so we would like find ways for me to like take over some of the homeschooling stuff or the childcare stuff, so that I could shoulder some of the burden while she was freed up to be able to do other stuff. And so that could be like take a nap, shower, go and do errands, go run and do some shopping while I watch the kids, because it's so hard to do that. As they got slightly older, we started to train them to do more of the stuff for themselves, more of their own homeschooling stuff, and also more of their own self-care stuff, like feeding themselves and showering themselves. So we started to train them to do that. And then the older kids, we started to train to help with the younger kids. And so that started to reduce some of the burden for us. We also called on other relatives to help us if we were feeling overwhelmed. So I think that really helps as well. It's hard though. Okay, let's go. I'm going to go to Jyothi's question. I know we're a little bit over time and I'm about to end it, but I want to just finish with that question. If anyone else has any other questions, please put them in the chat. I can always do a YouTube video on it later. I'm recording YouTube videos that specifically address things that all of you are putting into the comments. So I really love it when you watch a video and then you put a comment. So you can do that here as well. But I really want to encourage you a couple of things. One is, before I answer the question and close, I really want to encourage you to subscribe to this YouTube channel. I'm creating content on a regular basis. Right now it's like twice a week. I don't know if I can keep up that pace, but twice a week content. I love it. It's free, so subscribe and help me grow the channel, but also let me know what you'd like me to create for you. So subscribe to the YouTube channel. ZenHabits.net is where the website is. Subscribe to the email or the blog there. And then right now, I am finishing enrollment for my most powerful program, which is Fearless Mastery. I'm going to see if I can put it into the chat. fearlessmastery.zenhabits.net. Now, if you go to that, I didn't put it as a link. I apologize. Should have put the HTTPS. But if you just copy and paste that into your browser, you'll see the program that I'm talking about. It's an 8-month program. It's a small group coaching program. So there's like 15 people in it who get coached, who meet every week, who support each other. And I'm there supporting you like this. Thank you, Deanna. Gianna's on my team and she's a moderator here and she makes the YouTube channel actually happen. So I want to credit Deanna, and she's going to be a part of helping support people in Fearless Mastery as well. It's a really powerful program. She's actually gone through it as well. People go through transformation there, and we actually work with resistance really deeply. So if you'd like some support with that, if you'd like to be in part of a community, if you'd like to get coaching from me, if you'd like to actually complete a really big, meaningful project this year, check out that link, get on a phone call with me, answer a few questions, and see if it's a good fit. Okay, let's finish by talking about resistance to change, as Jyoti says. I feel resistance to change things or to do exercise. I feel something bad might happen if I do so, eventually end up not doing it. Yeah, so when we are faced with change, we really struggle with that a lot of times because, first of all, it is a shift from what we are comfortable with. Even if what we're comfortable with isn't something we like I don't like not exercising, I feel really out of shape and I feel bad about my health and I know this is really bad for me, but it's so much more comfortable here than to make that change. So that's the first thing, is we resist because it's uncomfortable to make any changes. But second is that there's some kind of fear with change. There is a reason why I've been staying in my comfort zone, is because if I make a change, I don't know what's going to happen. I feel uncertainty, and I'm actually afraid that some bad outcomes might happen. Maybe, you know, if I start exercising and my spouse isn't, they're going to feel really bad about it and feel like I'm abandoning them and changing too fast, and they're going to start to feel insecure about their body. And these things can happen. Changes can affect others around us, but it can also affect us. Like, I don't know if, is this actually going to be a good thing for me? I don't know if it's going to change how I see myself. I don't know if I'm going to embarrass myself. I don't know if, and so on, right? And so a quick answer to that, because it's a deep question. A quick answer to that is what we want to do, as opposed to being too hyper focused on the fear of it, we want to let ourselves feel the possibility of it, which is, if I change, what would be amazing about that? What do I really want on the other side of that change? That would be freaking incredible. And so this is the thing that makes us feel expansive and lit up. And I want you to write that down as a half-page mission statement. Why make this change? What would be amazing? Let's imagine a year later, you've made this change, your life is different, you're different. What would be amazing about that? And these objections and fears and doubts will come up. But I'd like you to write down the possibility that would be amazing. If you don't have that, why do this at all? Why face the fear? And this is your mission statement. I want you to remember this every time you're feeling the fears and doubts. What would be amazing about this? What's the possibility that lights you up? And then remind yourself of that. Now, the fears are there, and acknowledge yourself like, yeah, I acknowledge you, fear. You're valid. I totally get you. And then just sit with the fear and be with it. And that is just loving yourself in the midst of fear, breathing, and then saying, I got you. Reassuring yourself and acting as if you fully trusted yourself. I got you, fear. We're going to be okay. I can deal with whatever outcome is on the other side of this. You might even think through, like, how would I deal with it if this happened and this happened and this happened? And if I really trusted myself, how would I deal with it? And then reconnect to the possibility. Misha subscribed. Yes. I am close to 8,000 subscribers on this YouTube channel. So if everyone here subscribes and then you tell your friends to subscribe, I'm going to hit 8,000. And I'll tell you what, if I hit 8,000, I will send you all $1,000 US. No, I'm just kidding. I will thank you all and send it out to the remote corners of the world that you're in, whether it's Israel or the Netherlands or Petaluma. I will thank you all, because I really, really love creating for this YouTube channel. And it's so much fun for me. And I love the community. I love the questions. I love that you showed up for this live. I'm going to do more of these lives in the future, since I'm seeing people show up for it. But for today, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for coming. Thank you for tuning in, participating in the chat, asking great questions, sharing. Thank you for being a reader for so long, and now a watcher, a subscriber. I really, really love all of you, and I'm so glad to have you in my life. Thanks for being part of this. Okay, take care, my friends. I'll talk to you later.